Calm, focus, happiness.
Hey, Mindful Tribe, welcome to the show. Today, we are going to be talking to someone who is an architect, and I've not interviewed an architect before. So I think this is going to be very, very interesting to find out how architecture and all the work he does in this field dovetails into mindfulness, because I'm sure being a creative, being mindful is a big part of it. But we're going to find out all about this. He's a multi-talented serial entrepreneur. Like I said, he's an architect, a builder, he's a lecturer, he's also a podcaster too. So we're going to find out so much more, but I'm here today with Lance Cayko. Lance, are you in mindfulness mode today?
I am in mindfulness mode today. Yep, 100%. I started out my day with my typical routine, waking up before the crack of dawn, stretching, praying the rosary, getting my coffee on, getting really emphasizing those golden hours in the morning before everybody else gets up and gets on with their day.
Cool. So what does mindfulness mean to you in your life?
That means being present 100%. I think one of the biggest, one of the phrases there's multiple quotes that I love of that people say. Some of them are from Kanye West, believe it or not. This one is not. And one of them that is, the future is unknown, the past is past, and the present is a present. And I really try to live in that kind of moment.
Yeah, that's awesome. So way back when you started working on your degree, your building construction technology degree, is that something that you just always wanted to do and you felt it was completely right for you? Or did you have to kind of move into that space?
No, it felt like that's where the spirit was moving me 100%. Yeah. I tried farming with my dad for one summer. I grew up in between a cattle ranch and a sugar beet farm in northwestern North Dakota. And when I was 13, I tried to do that. I tried to irrigate sugar beets with my dad, and it was a horrible mess. Not that I was adverse to hard work. It was I didn't get along with my father that much. It did seem very unfulfilling to me. It sort of seemed like dead end. I mean, God bless him for working and making the boss farm survive for that long. But you could see that, like, as far as entrepreneurship goes and trying to pull yourself out of lower middle class areas, that's not going to be the way forward. So I lasted about a week, and he said, well, and I said, hey, this is really isn't working for me. Like, my best friend Chris will happily take my job here. And he said, well, you got to do something. And I go, I'm here to raise, kids with a strong Protestant work ethic and, the whole Americana thing. And I said, okay, well, how about I'll call up your friend Bruce, your best friend, one of your best friends, and ask him, who he was a general contractor. I said, I'll call him up and I'll see if I can work with him. I've always wanted to try construction. I had always grown up with grandma making sure that I had all the Legos, all the sketchbooks, was constantly creating and drawing and attempting to build things, just had that prowess about me. So I called up Bruce and I said, hey, I can't work with my dad anymore. I'll do anything. I'll do anything on the job site just to be there. And, what do you pay? And you have any openings? And he goes, sure, you can be my gopher. I go, cool. What's that? And he goes, well, you'll go for this, you go for that. When you're done going for the things, then you can get up on the roof and learn how to roof. So I jumped into that, and it was very, very brutally hard work. I mean, you're getting up at like 4 or 5, having the roofs torn off. We would do one a day. We'd have it tore off by about mid AM, have it put back on by 3 p.m. It was dirty, it was hot, it was dusty. Asphalt shingles are very, very heavy, but I just loved every single minute of it. I loved the camaraderie. I loved all, just even like the cat calling and stuff like that. And the culture of the whole thing. And it was a place of presence for sure. I mean, you had to pay attention, otherwise you're going to fall off the roof. You're working with sharp knives and nail guns and all of that. And it's dangerous. And that's what then there was an epiphany that Bruce basically put in my head that summer. And we're about halfway through the summer, and he leans to me and he says, how much do you think I charge my customers for 1 hour of your labor? And I go, well, you're paying me $725, obviously. And he laughed and laughed. And I go, oh, why is that so funny? And he explained how the multiplier works. And, what he said, no, typically I'm charging, 2 to 3 to maybe even 4 times what I'm paying you to them. And I go, why would you do that? He explained profit, he explained overhead, and it all clicked for me. And it was a huge difference between my dad and Bruce. Mm-hmm. And what Bruce Bruce was not rich, but he was definitely free from the anxiety of worrying about money. And I thought, man, if you're free from the anxiety of worrying about money, what does that do for your mind? Like that seems like freedom to me. It just seems like I'm going to be taken out of this prison, worrying about money and worrying about asking mom and dad for money. I hated it. And so I was like, man, I should be like Bruce. Okay, next summer I'm going to, learn concrete. Summer after that, I'm going to learn framing. And every single summer, all the way up until I went to Wahpeton for building construction tech, I would try to learn a different trade to set myself free in that kind of way.
Wow, that's really fascinating. I grew up on a farm too, and we had sugar beets as well. So I really resonate.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, I really
where was yours at? I know I'm not supposed to interview you, but I'm so curious.
Yeah, in Ontario, Canada.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
sugar beets. Yeah. So the irrigation the same kind of way. So hard. And the mosquitoes up there are probably terrible too.
Yeah, and we had to hoe the sugar beets. Did you ever have to do that?
Well, that was one of the things we didn't have to do is because we did have migrant workers that would come up from Mexico on a work visa. But the irrigation was all us. And so, waking up every 2 or 3 hours was just not fulfilling. I really detested it. And what's hilarious is like doesn't mean I'm adverse to farming. I have a nonprofit that's Longmont Community Garden. So like I try to grow as much food as I can for myself. I love earthing, grounding, being with the earth and stuff like that. So.
Yeah. And you have 6 kids. So did you decide that you wanted to have a big family, lots of children then?
4.
Oh, you have 4.
It's 2 stepchildren, 2 biologicals. I didn't have if I could go back in time and I could redo everything. That's probably one of the things I would do is I would actually try to have more children than even the 2 and the plus 2.
Yeah.
But that's hindsight's 2020. I can't do that now. I'm 40 years old. Like that sail has that ship has sailed and everything.
Yeah.
But I do and did love those kind of giant family vacations and having that many children, especially when they were before the teen years hit. They were they were actually so well behaved. We would get compliments almost every single time we were out in public. Because I mean, in America, for sure, it's like now families are maybe, I think it's like an average of 1.8 children, right? So we're sort of in that decline as far as the population goes. So to see a family of 4 children plus a mom, so a full family of 6, was a lot for people to take in.
Yeah,
it was just kind of I noticed it right away. I was like, wow, we are kind of like celebrities walking around. So it was a beautiful experience. I wouldn't redo it in any other way. I loved every part of that. In fact, what I really want now is I'm 40 years old, and I would love my children are the 2 bios are 14 and 19. So soon enough, I mean, you could potentially be talking to Grandpa Lance. And after their confirmations, one of the things I wrote them both very personal letters and said, hey, one of the things I wish my mom and dad would have told me, or at least had a backbone, like tried to be the sort of backbone that I want to be for them in a different way, was I wish they would have reassured me that if I wanted to have as many children as possible, that they would be there for me physically, monetarily, spiritually, in that sort of way, and help support them in their budding families. So I hope it's a 14 and 19-year-old even care about what dad says in that regard? No, but I still said it. They have it. They know it. Maybe when they get to that age, they'll take it seriously. But I would love to be surrounded later on in life with as many grandkids as possible.
So what do you think some of the secrets were that you were able to have this family and everybody thought, wow, look at how well behaved everybody is, and this just looks like the model family? Is there an element of mindfulness do you think that you used to raise your family?
Yeah, we were not fearful. We didn't worry about that future part, even though all the statistics pointed against us in that sort of way of blending the families and everything. We tried our best, and we moved forward in that kind of way. I mean, we didn't worry about the past, right? Because we were okay with blending into the present and living in that sort of arena. I think that was the mindful part of it, is we just had to be brave.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you do lectures at the University of Boulder. When you first started doing that, were you pretty nervous and on edge, or is that something that you've always just really embraced and felt comfortable with?
So I thought I had got over the fear of public speaking by the time I had got to the University of Colorado Boulder in 2013 and was a paid and still is a paid lecturer there. But that first semester was pretty nerve wracking. I will admit that I still got the nerves when I got up there because I hadn't presented that material to anybody in that kind of a public arena.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but by the second time around, it was easier. And by the third time around, when you teach a course, if anybody is also a lecturer, I know, or teacher, I know people, especially at the higher education level. Many of my colleagues up at North Dakota State, even I tell them about this a lot of time, is that 50, first time you teach a course, 50% of it you get it right, 75% in the second time around. Third time you're at 95, and then you're just tweaking and honing in on that, as you move forward. But I had thought I had got over that fear because when I was in college at North Dakota State, between 2003 and 2008, I wasn't a good public speaker. I didn't feel comfortable saying what I thought I had and knew in my head. And part of it is just owning all the material, right? After you master the material, you should just be able to pontificate about it, probably, in a nice, concise way. And there was this gentleman, his name is Justin Miedema. He was a fellow student of, with me when I was going to school there. He was not a good architect, but he was an excellent speaker. And he was such a powerful speaker. He proved to me that if your speaking skills can make up for a talent maybe you don't have, and you can still sell the idea and you can still maneuver professionally. So I made it a point to speak publicly as many times as I could and really lean into being a good orator. And by the end of my academic career in North Dakota State, that's what I'm getting at, is like, I thought I was done being nervous. So you fast forward to now in 2023, when I give lectures, whether it's in public or a podcast interview like this, the nerves are finally gone, but it took probably way more than the 10,000 hours that you hear about to master things. For me, it was probably like 20 or 30,000 before I finally, no more nerves.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. Your company that you co-founded is F9 Productions. You co-founded it in 2009 with your business partner, Alex Gore. What made that company different from any other architectural firm?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. We were born out of the Great Recession because of the employers that let Alex and I down. Without naming names, Alex went to New York City and worked for a very, very prominent, world-class, world-famous architect who just concentrated on a very select kind of work for like the 0.01% of society. I went out to Boulder and worked for young architects of the year nationally, very prominent people as well, small boutique firm, same problem. They catered towards a very small segment of society and the kind of work that architects could do, because architects could do a multitude of things, right? I mean, I think the sky is literally the limit, right? Skyscrapers and stuff like that. So when we got laid off from both those firms respectively during the Great Recession, we took a hard look at what were they doing wrong? We got to do the opposite of that. And we were sort of forced into starting the firm because 50% of people that were working in the architectural, engineering, and construction community were laid off during the Great Recession. Our sector actually got hit the most compared to other sectors of society. Like the tech sector was still crushing. A lot of those things were doing just fine. And so we said, okay, we are not getting hired by anybody. Basically, we need to find our own work. And so we did. I was able to do that pretty easily. Alex was able to do that once he came down and joined forces with me. And so we thought, like, what is the opposite of what the firms we did that we were working for that got laid off? And a lot of it starts with like a fundamental shakedown of the whole system. Is like, okay, we don't have a lot of built work right now. In fact, we had none when we first started trying to get our first clients and everything like that. So that's where the name F9 Productions comes from. Is we used to the software we would use to create the renderings, the photorealistic renderings, to make it look like we had bill work. The hotkey in the keyboard is F9. So all we had was F9 productions of those photorealistic renderings. So we started assembling that there. And then we started looking at what kind of how can we come in? We're going to have to be the low to medium bid. There's no way we can be the high bid right now if we don't have repeat clients, referrals, and all of that. But how do we still maintain profit and feed ourselves being the low to medium bid? So what we did is we took a look at a template for ourselves. We use Revit architecture to create all of our drawings software. And we created Revit Rocket Ship and the template in the software system for all of that. And basically it made us like twice as fast or 3 times as fast as the other guys, because when we're drawing a wall in plan, it's extruding it in 3D. It's sort of recreating all of the other drawings for us as we go. That what I'd say is the fundamental thing that we did. And then the third thing is we advertise on the internet. We actually advertise. Like architects, we were one of the first people in Colorado to actually fully embrace getting a Google business listing up, advertising with Google AdWords, getting on thumbtack.com, and doing some innovative things to try to get in the media in that sort of way. Just really embracing like the business side of architecture, which kind of probably sounds simple to the audience here. They're like, well, yeah, is an architecture a business? Not to most architects.
Right. Yeah, there a lot of firms were slow to advertise on Google and to do that kind of advertising. You have your podcast, Inside the Firm Podcast, and we can find it at insidethefirmpodcast.com or lots of other places where you listen to podcasts as well. And I know you have over 400 episodes. What have you learned about podcasting that has caused your podcast to be so successful and obviously self-sustaining?
Networking, number one. That's the biggest thing, right? So like when we launched the Inside the Firm podcast, we had actually, Alex and I had, it was technically our second podcast. First podcast is what's called Driving to Work. And it was kind of just a fun, me and Al would be driving to go lecture at CU Boulder together because we used to lecture together. And we would always have these very interesting conversations talking about like socio-political things, architecture, design, just family, whatever. We started recording those, and that's where we learned how to just podcast and have a cadence and have an outline and topics to talk about, upload it to the RSS feeds and all of that. It was a really good trial run, because then when we ended up launching Inside the Firm podcast, we kind of figured out the formula. And for people who don't know but or want to start their own, there's the formula should be, you should probably have like maybe 5 to 10 episodes banked and they are ready to go. So you have a backlog. But the biggest thing to make sure that they're successful is if you can network with other podcasters and get on their show and vice versa, have them on your show, and then sharing is caring and people hear about you in that sort of way. I think that's probably the biggest lesson that we learned, is how important it is to then, if you do become one of those voices like we are in the architecture community as far as podcasting goes, like I'm really good friends with the big guys, Enoch Sears, Mark LePage, and now we're in some mastermind groups with them to try to figure out, content strategies, how to get bigger and all of those sort of things. And then consistency, is so huge for just everything, right? Which kind of is, on the lines of mindfulness, like you are consistent with whatever you're trying to build or make happen, right? Like if you weren't consistent, if you started to build a house and you're like, well, I come on Mondays, maybe Thursdays, like how long is it going to take to build that house? Forever, right?
Yeah.
Versus I'm there every single day, crushing it, getting it done, mindful of what I need to get done every single day.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Consistency. I totally agree with you. That's one thing that I emphasized when I started my podcast in 2015, for sure. Lance, I want to ask you about just let me just pause here for a second.
No worries.
Lance, I want to ask you, if you wrote a book, what would that book be about? And what would the major message be to your reader?
I was just thinking about that this morning. It's crazy you just asked that. because I thought, man, I should really. And the times I'm most reminded of the book I should be writing is when I am being a father. So taking my daughter to school this morning, and I thought, man, back in the day when I was teaching, I teach a different course than I used to teach at University of Colorado Boulder, which is, it works better for me actually because of the schedule. And that's the point of this story is I used to have to like really try to figure out how do I get to CU Boulder by 8 a.m. with still having to drop the kids off, and I can't drop them off as early as I need to. It was so stressful. And I used to be a single father in that way. It was very, very difficult. And I thought, man, I really don't want to let go or lose sight of all of those struggles that I had from starting the firm, the podcast, lecturing, all of those sort of things. They're so important. They're huge lessons. And I think they demonstrate perseverance and courage and pushing a boulder up, metaphorically up a mountain every single day. So I would write it about myself. And I thought, man, the only way I feel like I'm never going to get this done is if I just hire somebody who can dictate the book. I can just dictate the book to them, and we work on it and collaborate together. And I have a couple contacts regarding that. I think it would be something along the lines of, pushing a boulder up a mountain every day or something like that would be sort of the title and the framework for it. And the whole concept would be, I'm a millennial, and I'm a millennial who basically hires mostly millennials and now Gen Z. And there's a huge victimhood culture mentality right now that is permeable in Western societies. It's just permeated the whole thing. And I hate it. I detest that because everybody's dealt a hand of cards. And yes, some people, I'm happy to acknowledge, some people are dealt a royal flush. No problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wouldn't call that privilege. I would just call that life. But some people like me are dealt a terrible hand of cards. But you're both playing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're both playing poker. We're both playing the game of chess. We all have moves. And I would want it to be a book that is, I'm not saying I'm Marcus Aurelius, but I want it to be like Meditations of Marcus Aurelius's book in that kind of way, like a modern version of it. That book changed my life. 2 years ago, I read it, hiking up and down the mountains. And what I loved about it was it just proved to me what Stoicism really is. And Stoicism is not Lance and Bruce just looking at each other and not saying anything. Stoicism is recognizing the hand you're dealt, accepting it. How do I play it properly? If you're somebody like me who was dealt a very poor set of cards, poker cards, metaphorically, you have to play them perfectly almost. That's on you, right? That's on me. That's like, that has nothing to do with, oh, well, I'm just throwing in the cards or stealing from the pile, to get better cards. That's what the book would be.
So tell me about that deck of cards that you were dealt. We don't know much about that yet here on this interview. Tell us what some of those challenges were.
Sure. I growing up in northwestern North Dakota, between a cattle ranch and a sugar beet farm, town of 500 people. Closest town, bigger town to us would have been 13 miles away. It had about 10,000 people when I was growing up. It was Williston, North Dakota. And in that, when you graduate with a class of 20, and it's a K through 12 school, and it's that rural, your options are almost non-existent. Like, what are the options, especially in that area where prior to the oil boom came back eventually. But when I was growing up, every single public school teacher that I can think of would say, would poo-poo the idea that the oil field would come back, really pushing you to go to college and try to make something yourself in that sort of way. And in hindsight, I sort of disagree with them. I'm glad I got pushed in that sort of way, but that's one of the big cards, right? Is like, well, it's a very desolate kind of place. Like, how do you get out of here? How do you even understand? Like, what kind of opportunities do you even see? Like, how does somebody like my mom or dad or my grandma take me out of this place and just show me parts of the world, even if it's over in Idaho with my aunt, who was very wealthy and got out of that place and seemed to be have no, her anxiety and her fear about money and not having it was non-existent. The other crucial part about where I grew up is we were sort of a bastardized Indian reservation, meaning we weren't really federally recognized. We did have like socialized medicine and housing and all of that. And that's a card that was dealt, right? So what happens when you put people in those kind of situations? Oftentimes, more often than not, even the statistics will show you this if you look it up, is that they become dependent on the system and they become complacent in it, right? Where's the fire? Like, where's the fire to get out of there and make yourself better and just get off of that and be more self-sufficient on your own? So those are some of the cards. Those are like the negative ones, right? But the positive ones is like, I had the grandma who took me to see the rich aunt in the summers. And I could see that, oh, there's like a whole different world out here that I didn't even understand. That's interesting. How do I position myself in that way? Having a mentor like Bruce, that's a big card. I talk to Bruce almost every week now. We actually reconvened about two years ago. His wife reached out to me and she said, hey, Bruce, would really like to come down and visit you in Colorado sometime. And he talks about you, thinks about you. And it was so crazy that she sent me that text on that day because I said, well, I don't know if you guys know this, but I really venerate Bruce often publicly. Like, I don't think you guys understand how big of a change he made in my life, how in one of the cards that I was dealt. And I sent her and him the interview where I was just gushing over Bruce and how big of a deal it was for me. And I don't know if he cried, but I think he probably did that day because I was one of the very few guys. We'd work with all these guys in construction labor. And I think I was one of the only ones that really took it seriously and listened and made a career out of it and got out of there. So those are some of the cards, both good and bad, that I'm very thankful for.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah. I know that one of your superpowers, it said in your bio, is your ability to write an email while eating an apple and listening to your favorite podcast. Have you always been able to multitask like that?
Yeah, I definitely have ADHD, but I just took like a test to see if I was on the autism spectrum, and I am slightly, just enough to like have sort of a superpower, right? Like I'm not functional in society, but I definitely push in those kind of directions in that way. So I think so. I mean, for some reason I'm able to do it, but it's like a blessing and a curse, right? So I mentioned reading that Marcus Aurelius book,
Mm-hmm.
hiking through the mountains. And I bet your listeners were like, what do you mean? You just like reading? No. The only way I can read a book is with audio and I have to be walking around or doing something.
Okay.
So like, that's part of the problem is like, when I say that multitasking part is like, I'm writing the email because I'm able to focus on the email because I'm Apple and they're listening to that podcast, right? So for me, it's a double-edged sword, and I finally honed in on that in my early 20s when we started the firm, and so far it's good for me, but I just really have to be aware of it.
Right, that makes sense. Lance, I always ask a question about bullying on my interviews, and so I just wonder if you have a story about bullying where mindfulness would have made a difference.
My biggest bully in my life would have been this guy named Jonas that I grew up with. And so when he would bully me, the one thing I would always keep in my mind and try to keep present and clear when interacting in that sort of way was, okay, keep this as fuel and keep your mind focused on the prize. And the prize is the bullying isn't going to matter once I'm an adult and I'm successful and I'm crushing compared to this guy. And all of that has played out and been true. So I just used it as a fire in my belly that would then went into my brain and just kept me focused on whatever I'm doing, architecture, construction, podcasting, fishing, all of the things I do in my professional life and personal is I'm just going to keep my eye on the prize, keep it there, and don't try to fight this guy. Like, it's not about fighting this guy mentally, physically, nothing of that. It's about It's about using that as fuel.
Interesting. I wonder if the work you do as a fisherman, is that mindful for you?
It's the most mindful thing. Besides gardening, it's the most mindful thing. And I'm so thankful for it. It's just, if there's anything that I could possibly do as somebody who's on the spectrum a little bit, has the ADHD, that makes me only do one thing at one time, it is fishing, right? I'm not eating the apple and fishing. I'm just fishing. I am very focused on, I'll say it often in my videos on Fishing with Lance at YouTube, is you'll hear me say, like, I'm even telling the audience, like, hey guys and gals, I'm watching the line. Like, now watch how I watch the line, because I'm just very focused on that line and what happens to the line. No matter what technique I'm using, it's almost always watch the line, watch the line, watch the line.
Yeah, that sounds very mindful for sure. Yeah. As we move forward in the interview, Lance, I want to ask you 5 quick answer questions. So just 30-second answers are perfect. The first one is this: who is one person who has been a powerful mindfulness influence for you?
Kanye West, 100%. One of his favorite quotes, I got to say it is, having money isn't everything, but not having it is. When he said it in that way, I was like, boy, that's me. Boy, that's me. Because it's not about possessions. Like, I'm sitting in our office that we designed, built, and developed, that we own, right next to 2 other rental properties that I own, 5 miles away from the $1 million house that my wife and I live in, and all sitting on a bunch of companies, and we're doing really well. But it's about the freedom from anxiety of not having the money.
Right. Interesting. Tell us how mindfulness has affected your emotions. And maybe you've kind of talked about that quite a bit, but if you could sum it up.
I have been, there's a gal that I had on my podcast a while ago, and she wrote this book, and it was called Holding the Calm. And I thought she was so intoxicating in such a good way with what she was saying. I was like, I need to read this book. And I literally bought it mid-interview. So after I just read it about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And that's my new goal. I believe that you have 4 lives. In your 20, from 1 to 20, you got life 1. 20 to 40, you got life 2. 40 to 60, you got life 3. 60 to 80, that's your last one. Some people live 80 to 100, but most of us are within that spectrum. So I'm like, oh, I'm 40. I'm on my 3rd life now. It's time to like fully grow up and become that kind of stoic, in the sense of, I'm the calm. I'm the leader that solves the problems by being calm while everybody else is crazy.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So is there a book besides that you would recommend, or is Holding the Calm the book that you would recommend for our listeners?
I would recommend Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, number 1.
Right.
And then if somebody else has read that, the second book I would recommend is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm actually buying 15 copies of that for the architecture students that I'm teaching. I have a studio of 15 up in North Dakota State in Fargo, and that's going to be their gift at the end of the semester next week.
Oh, that's fantastic. I want to ask you about breathing. Do you have any comments, thoughts, insights about breathing?
Yes. What I used to, when I woke up, I would try to say, thank you, God, after that first breath every single day. I haven't been doing that as much, and I need to get back to that. But I want to just start there in that answer. Is like, it's that important, right? Like that first breath, you're like, I'm alive. Thank you, God. What it's now become for me is when I'm hiking up and down the mountains, and recently I've been on some crazy ones, like 17 miles round trip just to go catch fish all the way up at 11,000 feet in the air in the Continental Divide. Last week it was 14 miles round trip, but just a very strenuous physical activity in that way. This summer, my daughter went on one of these hikes with me. It actually was not that hard. This one was only like 3 miles or something, but for her it was very hard. And I'm beating her and my cameraman Bill up the mountain, super steep. It's probably like a 50% grade. And I take a break, and I'm like my back is resting up against the mountainside. I'm sweaty, just drenched in sweat. and I'm breathing super hard, but I'm smiling. And Kaya comes up to me and she's like, I hate being all wet. I'm so tired. She's out of breath. And she goes, why are you smiling? I go, isn't this awesome? Don't you just feel alive right now? Like, think about how alive you feel right now, Kaya. This is perfect. You know you're alive. There's no doubt you're alive. That's what breathing means to me right now.
Love that explanation. That's really awesome. Are there any apps that you would recommend?
Well, if you're a Catholic or a person of prayer like me, I use the Hollow app every single day. On my just in my life, that's probably the one I use the most, honestly, in terms of just personal growth. And then there's been, I think it's called Headspace.
Yes,
that's where I learned how to meditate. That'd be the second one. I recommend that to people for learning how to meditate. And again, kind of like reading the Marcus Aurelius book, it proved to me, I was like, oh, meditation is not about not thinking. Meditation is about the way I learned it through that app is like, you are just recognizing like even the positive and the negative, but a lot of negative stuff. You're recognizing it and then it goes away, meaning it doesn't linger in your brain. Like you have addressed it in that way. And it just helps you become a better stoic and navigate a very chaotic world.
Yeah, I agree with that very much so. As we wrap up the interview, Lance, I want to ask you if you have any final words of advice for our listeners.
Every entrepreneur is scared when they start out doing anything on their own. And that's normal. So the biggest thing, I think, the myth that I want people to understand is that you don't have to do it all. Like the best entrepreneurs, like Elon Musk, they're actually better at delegating than they are maybe even at the math behind all the rockets and everything like that. So if you are fearful, just know that what the biggest thing you need to overcome is your fear of delegating and trusting people. Sure, you have to go through the process of interviewing them and making sure you can trust them and everything like that. But if you're paralyzed about finally making that leap and making something of yourself instead of just being a cog in the machine, in the corporate machine, and you want to go out there and find some freedom like me, freedom from anxiety of money, just doing what you want every day, mostly as a business person, you just got to take the leap and get over that fear.
Yeah, good advice. Lance, it's been great getting to know you. Fantastic having you on the Mindfulness Mode podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Bruce, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Bye now.